All right, and welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Miller with Campfire, and I'm so glad to have you with us here. We're sitting and talking today with Dr. Mark Ward, as I just learned now at the university. So tell me if I get this right, Dr. Ward. Uh, Texas A&M Victoria. Is that, am I
Uh,
getting that more or less correct?
Mostly correct. It's the same building, same campus, same office, but as of September 1st, 2025, the University of Houston Victoria was transferred from the University of Houston system instead to the Texas A&M University system, so that now my official institutional affiliation is Texas A&M University Victoria.
Excellent. Well, very good. I'm uh, so pleased that you're joining me to talk a little today. We're going to talk a little bit about your keynote address to RCA last year, which is now being printed in our first issue of JCR, issue 48.1, which will be hitting pretty soon, probably about the same time that this will be posted here. Why don't we dive right in? But thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, what a privilege, and I've been looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So, in that keynote address, the God Problem 2.0, restarting the conversation, you opened your address by revisiting, of course, Quentin Schultz's 2004 challenge about the God problem and communication studies. So, that address, of course, takes us back beyond when I started in the discipline. I would imagine back before a lot of folks currently in RCA were a part of the discipline. Can you take us back a little bit to that moment and what it meant to you as a new graduate student and how it set the trajectory for the last 20 years as you've been having that conversation about the God problem?
Well, and a bit of background too, that the address was given upon presentation of my being named the 2024 Religious Communication Association Scholar of the Year. And every year, in conjunction with the National Communication Association Convention, we have our own, what used to be called a pre-conference. We call it our first day conference. And so that for the official beginning of the NCA convention, we have our own all-day RCA program that culminates with our annual awards banquet. And RCA each year gives out a number of awards: Scholar of the Year, Book of the Year, Article of the Year, Book Chapter of the Year, Dissertation of the Year, Mentor of the Year. And so it was a great honor and privilege for me to be named last year in 2024 as the RCA Scholar of the Year. Yeah. And so this article that'll be appearing in volume 48, issue 1 of the RCA Journal, the Journal of Communication and Religion, is essentially a transcription with notes. The keynote address that I gave at the annual awards banquet last year. And so I start out, my first career was in religious publishing and broadcasting. And when my own two children graduated from college, I thought to myself, well, golly, what do I want to be when I grow up? Always had it in the back of my mind that I'd like to get the PhD while I was still young enough to do it. And so my wife and I made the decision in midlife that we'd go for it. And so I entered the PhD program at Clemson University. And before that, the MA in Communication Studies at Spring Arbor University. So that's sort of how I got from there to here and started on the academic life. And I come out of a more of a fundamentalist background that was more about answers than it was about questions.
Sure.
Something that I appreciated about my time at Spring Arbor University is much more of a spirit of inquiry or asking questions that I had not experienced in my previous faith community.
Yeah.
And so I had always been interested in the question of theodicy, or God's justice in the world, And actually, my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation were related to questions related to the Holocaust.
Wow.
And looking at essentially the final solution through the lens of organizational communication and culture.
Wow.
And so, as I was studying these things, I ran across Dr. Schultz's article, "The God Problem in Communication Studies." And he starts out, and here's a quote from the article: "If God exists and if God communicates with human beings, how can we study communication comprehensively without taking into account the agency of God? At the same time, however, can a scholar identify and interpret transcendent speech?" And given my looking at the Holocaust and the final solution, again, the question of theodicy, or God's justice in the world, certainly came up. And there has been, over the last, more than half a century, a lot of discussion about post-Holocaust or post-Auschwitz theology, particularly among Jewish theologians. And many of them said, well, how do you explain this except, through supernatural, supernatural humanism? And yet, probably the best-known Holocaust historian, Yehuda Bauer, he said that, well, if you subscribe everything to supernatural causes, then, what's the point of research? I mean, that's the total answer. And so, research into human causes really becomes moot. And so I was trying to weigh the two. On the one hand, there was Dr. Schultz and his thesis about if God exists and if God communicates with human beings, how can we study communication comprehensively without taking into account the agency of God? And yet at the same time, though he was challenging readers to somehow keep on the agenda, some connection, some relationship between knowledge and belief. And I guess what I came to in my own scholarship is the idea that personally, I am willing to keep on the agenda a connection in the relationship between knowledge and belief. But when it comes to my scholarship, when it comes to my research, that I will just research human communication, but I will leave it to my own personal faith commitments. The idea that God may accommodate himself to the human communication processes that I study. So thinking through that question, that God problem, was prompted by Dr. Schultz's article. And though I've come to different conclusions than he has, we have a great relationship. He had the final chapter in my edited volume, God Talk, the problem of divine human communication. Great relationship, but his article sort of sparked a train of thought that I have to deal with this God problem, and I chose to deal with it by essentially bracketing it off for research purposes and leaving God's accommodation to human communication to my own personal faith commitments.
Well, yeah. So what do you think? So why restart that conversation? And well, I would say 2025, but you restarted the conversation, a couple of years ago. It looks like. Why? What does restarting the conversation about the God problem look like in 2024, 2025?
I started my doctoral studies. I started at Clemson University in 2007 and got a graduate assistantship. And now all of a sudden, I had both time and funds to attend conferences, and was able to start attending Religious Communication Association conferences and NCA conferences. I think my first RCA conference was in 2009. And because I was, working through this, as Dr. Schultz put it, what is the relationship between belief and knowledge, and coming to my own conclusions, I thought, well, there must be other scholars who are wrestling with this. What I would say is that, for one thing, I have found that really across all the disciplines, that scholars tend to research topics to which they feel some sort of personal connection.
Absolutely.
The usual jargon is, maintaining an active research agenda. And, with teaching and service and research, that's not easy to do. It takes a lot of passion. And oftentimes that passion comes from feeling some sort of a personal connection. As I started getting involved in RCA conferences and meetings, I found that, many times people are drawn to the field of religious communication because they feel a personal connection through their own personal faith commitments. So I thought, well, okay, they must be working through this God problem like I am, and what could I learn from them? And generally, what I found is that because most RCA participants were either Catholics committed to the Catholic intellectual tradition, which I respect a great deal, or evangelical Protestants who saw research and scholarship in terms of religious advocacy, that because they all came from Christian faith commitments, that the obviously correct answer to the God problem is what Dr. Schultz called theistic communication studies. So since that was obviously the correct answer, then nobody was talking about
it. Yes.
Right. It was just assumed that, well, of course, we're going to engage in theistic communication studies. And so I felt that, we needed to restart this conversation because I was working through it myself and coming to my own conclusions. And so in I believe 2019 and 2020, I organized a couple of panel discussions at the RCA meetings. And then out of that grew the edited volume that came out in 2023, God Talk, The Problem of Divine Human Communication, where we have 10 chapters from both seasoned and newer scholars trying to address how do you actually do credible research and work through the God problem. The unique thing about religious communication studies is that it's probably the one field where we're studying people who make claims of supernatural communication. So how do you deal with that? And so my burden for that edited volume and for the article that is coming out, my speech at the Scholar of the Year address, is suggesting that we need to be able to do empirical research that meets the standards of the communication studies discipline without substituting faith claims for observation.
Yeah. Have there been things that, in your time in the discipline, have there been strategies that you've picked up along the way that help you to do
that? It starts with what I just articulated, and that is making a basic decision that I am going to, bracket off supernatural claims and leave those to, my own personal faith. So that when I do my research, I'm going to confine it to human communication in religious settings and contexts. To me, that avoids the problem of, totalizing the supernatural as the answer. I leave it to my own personal faith commitments. And I do want to also stress that I feel very strongly that the phrase religious communications scholar should be defined as a communication scholar who studies, a scholar who studies religious communication, as opposed to a communication scholar who is religious. There is wonderful work that is being done by people of not only non-Christian faiths, but of no faith. And they need to be welcome within our discipline. But, getting back to the question, what does that mean, restarting the conversation, or at least what strategies have I used to work through it? So one is, I am bracketing off supernatural claims and confining my research to, human-to-human communication. My own particular strategy after that is I happen to research the methodology is the ethnography of communication, where I go into the field. I observe how people communicate to each other in religious settings, and then I try to interpret the cultural assumptions around which their speech is patterned. And it so happens that I observe a community, a culture to which I myself belong, and that is the culture of evangelical Protestantism, which I personally identified for nearly 50 years. But in order to be an ethnographer, essentially in your own backyard, you have to have the ability to sort of step back and be able to, in a sense, estrange your cultural self and look for those moments where you can defamiliarize yourself, because otherwise, you're maybe not going to notice things that would be cultural practices that seem natural and normal in that culture, but are just really indicative of cultural assumptions and the construction of the culture. So you have to be able to step back and be able to sort of bracket off your cultural self and be your ethnographer self. So that does take some effort, over time. As you continually make this habit of stepping back, it does create some distance. But I've also found that autoethnography has been very helpful for me. Autoethnography is more than just scholarly navel gazing. It is actually a rigorous method. And even a traditional ethnographer, you need ways to be able to have the self-reflexivity to see what biases that you're bringing to the field, so you're not creating a false interpretation. And I find that autoethnography gives me a rigorous method to be able to practice that kind of self-reflexivity. In the book, the edited volume, God Talk, The Problem of Divine Human Communication, some of the other scholars suggest some other ways. One is to sort of step back from Western modes of thinking, and to be able to recognize that, why don't you stop being the expert and realize that the community that you're studying, that they are the best experts, and that you go ahead and just assume that their ways of knowing that they are true. Another way is to maybe to recruit a diverse research team. So that you can all provide a check on each other. And then some other ways that are suggested are perhaps autoethnography or hermeneutic phenomenology, ways to investigate your own frames of reference as well as those of the informants that you study. So there are ways to do research into communication in religious settings among people that claim supernatural communication, but be able to do it in a way that I think meets the standards of the communication discipline for empirically based research.
Yeah. I feel very, very fortunate that during my master's program, I attempted an autoethnography that I think probably the phrase academic navel gazing, probably described pretty well. And I found out pretty quick how, just how rigorous doing an actual autoethnography can and should look. So I feel pretty fortunate that I got corrected pretty early in terms of that.
Yeah, I made a commitment a couple of years ago. It had always been in the back of my mind that autoethnography could add insights to my ethnographic work among Protestant evangelicals. So I pitched a mixed methods book where I would sort of take my 20 years of ethnographic research and try to make it accessible in a single volume to general readers, but also to bring out some of the more telling insights that autoethnography could bring to the table. And so the publisher accepted it. It was Lexington Books, and it came out earlier this year in 2025 as Inside Evangelicalism, the Culture of Conservative White Christianity, where I, again, try to take my 20 years of field research, make it accessible in a single volume for general readers, but also then add to it the insights that I think really a lot of sharpness and humanize them as I add my own autoethnographic narratives.
Yeah, that's terrific. This might be too broad a question, so if it is, that's okay. If you've got nothing for me, that is completely okay. Do you think there are concrete steps, because we are the Religious Communication, Association, we're both parts of it, we're both heavily involved in it. Are there things we can be doing to make the RCA more welcoming to those? You mentioned before that, we have a definite flavor religiously, in terms of who tends to be a part of it. Folks from the Roman Catholic tradition, folks from, or coming out of the evangelical Protestant tradition. Do you think there are things we can be doing to make our scholarly community more welcoming to those outside of those faith traditions?
Yeah, in my keynote address and in the article that's coming out, I make the point that I have made in other written work that probably the best way to ghettoize religious communication as a field of study is to have it be perceived as um, theology, or
Yes.
having it be perceived as religious advocacy as opposed to communication studies.
Have
And
it be the Christian Communication Association.
yeah, that it's sort of a Christian club, as it were. And I think that RCA and religious communication may, in fact, have that reputation. We know that religion is not always the most popular or the glamour subject to study within the academy generally. In the communication studies discipline, I often see position announcements for health communication, political communication, race and gender studies, queer studies, all things that need to be. But I have yet to see a position announcement for a scholar in religious communication.
Which is too bad in 2025 with how religious communication affects and forms the world around us.
Yeah, I've taught intercultural communication, and one of the things that comes up in chapter 1 is, what are the institutions of society that pass along its values? And essentially, they are three: the state, the family, and religion. And so religion does need to be studied because it is one of the mainsprings of human action and, unfortunately, human conflict. But so if religious communication, again, if it's perceived as these are, rather than scholars who study religious communication, these are communication scholars who are religious, then that is a way to, and we feed that narrative when our published work is essentially either based on or makes religious claims, religious truth claims. And I think there was a fine study that came out, I want to say, in last year's first edition, volume 47, volume 1, where a number of younger scholars, and there were 5 of them, so I don't want to miss somebody's name, but it was called A Certain Kind of Religion. And they surveyed 20 years worth of articles in the Journal of Communication and Religion. And they discovered that, by and large, that they assumed a theistic stance, assumed mostly Christian, and almost entirely neglected or simply skipped over, issues of power and hegemony. So because many, and I know, and I mentioned this in my keynote address, that many who are involved in religious communication studies are at religiously affiliated institutions. And one reason that I decided to make my career in a public university is because you don't have that pressure to come out with the right answers, or to be able to shade your research in such a way that it protects a certain religious viewpoint. And I'm not accusing my RCA colleagues of doing that by any means. As far as what we need to do to not be ghettoized, I think that we need to have discussions about, are we welcoming, I mean, I want to be very careful that, I am a person of faith. I
Mhm.
do have deep religious commitments. And, I think that, because I have lived religious experience, I can add to the diversity of the voices in the academy.
Mhm.
George Marsden, who is a professor evangelical, and one of the dean of historians of American religious history. He wrote a book, I believe, 1997, called "The Outrageous Idea of Christian Scholarship."
Mhm.
He made the point that those with lived religious experience can be able to maybe miss connections that others wouldn't see.
Mhm.
And so, from that standpoint, my own personal faith commitments may be relevant. But he also suggested that in order to have a place at the table at the academy, that those that you had to practice what he called methodological secularization. That
Mhm.
you have to study phenomena, in our case, communication phenomena, that are accessible to all scholars and therefore, can be critiqued.
Mhm.
Because if you are studying phenomena that are only accessible to, say, persons of your own faith commitments or your own faith community, then it's not accessible to others, and you cut yourself,
Absolutely.
robust critique, which so much has benefited my scholarship. So I want to be very careful that.
Absolutely.
Even though I am a person of personal faith commitments, I don't want it to come across that you have to be a communication scholar who is religious in order to be part of religious communication studies. Uh,
Absolutely. I would dare say, I'm speaking as somebody who, like you, is a person of faith, a scholar. I dare say I need scholarship on religious communication from those maybe who are not, of faith. They see things at the same time that I miss.
yeah,
Looking
and
at
yeah, and let
religion.
me say straightforwardly, and maybe this, you asked me about my 20-year trajectory. When I started being involved in RCA, going on, I guess, almost 20 years ago, that I felt that in order to be accepted, I had to self-present as a person of faith.
Wow.
And that, to be accepted within the community of
Wow.
scholars in religious communication studies, I felt that I needed to self-present. I needed to, yeah. Uh, Now, I am gratified that I've gotten to know some younger scholars who have gotten involved more recently in RCA, and
Mhm.
that have not felt that same pressure to self-present as religious persons. And that's not to say that many of our newer scholars don't come out of personal faith commitments, and that is their personal connection. But
Mhm.
that's a change, a little bit of a change that I've seen.
Good.
That
Yeah.
I think as I've talked with some younger scholars, they feel less pressure to self-present as persons of faith, and more free to either, not present as persons of faith, or to explore difficult questions of power and
Sure.
hegemony. That according to that survey, A Certain Kind of Religion, that 20 years ago when I was getting started, that it was just sort of assumed that religious communication studies started from the basis of, and again going back to the start of this conversation, what Quentin Schultz called theistic communication
Yeah.
studies.
Absolutely. Is there anything else from your article, your keynote, that you want to make sure we touch on before I move us on to something else? Here, anything that you want to make sure we make mention of?
Yeah, let me just real quickly,
Please.
just restate. I said that we need to do five steps or
Mhm.
five things, and so here they are.
Please.
And I'll just read it out. It's the final paragraph in the introduction section where I summarize it. And here's what I say. In the end, I believe that we must develop approaches to the God problem that, one, are intellectually defensible as producing solid scholarship that meets the standards of the communication studies discipline. Two, do not substitute faith claims for empirical evidence. Three, follow the evidence where it leads without presupposing the answers that we may desire to protect our viewpoints. 4, present evidence accessible to all scholars and allow our scholarship to benefit from rigorous peer critique. And 5, take seriously our ethical obligations when we encounter harmful and oppressive communication in the communities that we study.
Yeah, very good. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on since that keynote and what maybe you're working on now? Give us a little tease of what's next from you.
Okay. I did make mention earlier that just earlier this year, after the last RCA conference, that my book, Inside Evangelicalism, The Culture of Conservative White Christianity, was released by Lexington Books. My latest article appeared in the Journal of Religion and Popular Culture. And it is entitled My Life After Christ, The Mediatization of Evangelical Conversion Testimonies. And essentially, I looked at 7 major evangelical organizations and their online guides to writing your personal testimony. And I found that they were almost the same. And of course, these testimonies are what anthropologists would call life stories. And you can tell a lot about a culture, about how you construct the sequence of a life story, how you impose order on the random events of our lives. And I found out that in these guides that there was no talk about theological terms, sin, forgiveness, redemption, etc. It was all about before I met Christ, my longings were unsatisfied. Then I met Christ, and after I met Christ, now my longings are satisfied, and my life is happy. So almost, therapy culture.
Yeah.
Looking at some of the stuff that I've got coming up, I've actually got a couple of articles being reviewed right now for the Journal of Communication and Religion. One of them is called Religious Rights as Organizational Rights, Cultural Performances and Organizational Congregational Activities. A longtime interest of mine is organizational communication and organized religion. They are organizations. And so there are a lot of theoretical frameworks from organization studies that can help us understand the cultures of congregations. And so that one looks at things like potluck suppers and worship services and men's and women's Bible studies, and, prayer breakfasts and things as organizational rights that tell us a lot about the culture. I also have a co-authored piece with Leland Spencer, who's known to many RCA members and colleagues, about this we call the power problem in religious communication studies, looking at issues of, just as Quentin Schultz said, how can you study communication? If God communicates with humans, how can you say? And we're looking at the premise, well, if power is inherent in communication, how can you study religious communication without taking power into account?
Yes.
Boy, real quick, let me just pull on down here. Works in progress. Some really interesting stuff coming up, if I say so myself. Let me just keep scrolling. Oh, wait a minute, I went too far. And here, okay. Oh, yeah, there we go. All right. Yeah, I have another article that's under review right now. And it's called I Plug the Service into Planning Center, Contemporary Evangelical Worship as Digital Religion. And I did some study, today with contemporary worship. I found, as I did some field observation, I didn't realize how much digitized it is. And I asked the worship pastor, I said, well, why don't we just use the hymnal? And he said, well, I have to use Planning Center and ProPresenter, and I have to use Multitracks, and I have to use Spotify, and he said, yeah, I'd love to do pastoral ministry, but and I said, well, I spent some time in radio, and it sounds like the job you're describing isn't worship pastor, but worship producer. And he said, yeah, you're probably right.
Wow.
And so essentially, I'm using frameworks from digital religion studies to look at how the digitization of contemporary evangelical worship and just the discourses from all of the major worship planning and production tools, how they essentially are turning evangelical worship on the one hand into a technological imperative for the worship pastor, and essentially into individualized therapy culture for those in the pews. Oh, let's see. I've also got a few things coming out in some edited volumes. I've got one coming out on the history of sermons in the 20th century and looking at the broadcast sermon. I've also got a chapter on some of you that maybe have been around evangelical churches are familiar with the term prayer request. And you start to be, anybody have any prayer requests? And so I interview that cultural practice as a form of virtue signaling. That, we signal our moral and spiritual virtue by making requests like, we need to pray for our country, we need to pray for our leaders, and all of the moral assumptions that are in that. Let's see, what else have I got going? Okay. Sorry. I'm so excited about
please, me too.
this stuff. Oh, let's see. Okay. Yeah. Many of your probably people are familiar with a streaming series now in its 5th season called The Chosen.
Right. Yes.
And I've noticed that in my 20 years of field observations, particularly in evangelical churches, that a lot of times people don't actually know the actual scriptures. They just know sort of a mashup version of the gospel story. You see it a lot at Christmas, where the shepherds and the wise men are all in the manger together, and all the rest. And so I asked the question, looking at the mediatization of religion framework, that what happens when because the producers of The Chosen, they freely, they add characters, they add dialogue, they invent backstories, and they say, but it's to bring out the truth, but it's still historical and authentic. And of course, the gospel writers had to do the same thing.
Right.
But I say, what happens when the narrative of, in this case, Christianity, when the narrative of the Christian faith becomes untethered from a stable, institutionally authorized text, and becomes essentially, takes on the logic of a dramatic television series. Let's see, I've got another one coming out in an edited volume looking at popular religion in the 90s. And so I look at how the deregulation of media and all the mass media mergers, how they have impacted actually religious media in very important ways. So that the religious media that people consume today is essentially controlled by only a handful of very large religious media conglomerates. And then the one that I just turned in was I essentially, I called it An Ethnographer Gets Converted, or What I Learned About Writing an Autoethnography by Writing an Autoethnography. And so I essentially wrote an autoethnography of what I learned by writing the autoethnographic portions of my book, Inside Evangelicalism, the Culture of Conservative White Christianity, because I spent a year essentially researching myself. And in many ways, it was cathartic, because I'm going back over essentially my whole adult life, and I'm sort of relitigating it. I'm tying up loose ends. I'm trying to make sense of it all. And as an autoethnographer will tell you, that this process can be emotional, it can be painful, it can be hurtful, but it also brings transformation and healing. And I want to be able to share the experience I had as someone in white evangelical Protestant culture for half a century, and how I spent a year essentially researching myself to try and make sense of so that other people could better understand that culture by seeing it by my experience of it. So That's some of the stuff I've got coming out. I do I've outlined maybe a possible next book, which is sort of a guide to how to do research in religious communication, and dealing with some of the issues that we've talked about today. So how do you actually research? I mean, we mentioned earlier it's important to research religious communities and religious communication, but how exactly do you do that? And hopefully, maybe I've learned a thing or two along the way that folks might find valuable, and that publisher might want to put into print.
Certainly. Well, so if anybody is wondering where Dr. Ward is, over these next few months, we've just heard, what he'll be doing. And if anybody wants to know where I am, I'm going to be reading all of these things that you've listed. We'll make sure to, for the pieces that are out, we'll make sure that on Campfire we'll have all of this linked so that people can find it. Find the things that are out that Dr. Ward has mentioned, and we'll be sure to be looking for those upcoming pieces that you've mentioned. Dr. Ward, thank you so much for taking this time with us today.
Before we sign off, as an old radio guy who would say things like, and operators are standing by if you call within the next 10 minutes, that kind of stuff, that those that may be interested in my work, I would love to dialogue with you. I'd like to learn from your work and your perspectives. And so there are some ways to get in touch with me.
Yes, please.
And you can email me at wardm@tamuv.edu. So that's Ward M for Texas A&M University of Victoria, wardm@tamuv.edu, or check out my personal website, which is markwardphd.com. And I've published, I think, nearly 50 different scholarly works on religious communication and media. I think at last count about 8 books. And I would just, love to be able to dialogue. And if you see anything there that interests you, I can send you copies. We can talk about it. So yeah, email me at wardm@tamuv.edu, or, come and check out my personal website, markwardphd.com. And there's also a contact page there too. We'd love to hear from you. Because religious communication, it's an important field of study, and we just need more cross communication among ourselves, and not work in all our individual silos. And so there are many different ways. I do ethnography. I've also done media studies. A lot of people do rhetorical work. I've done that too. And so yeah, let's get together and let's go ahead and talk.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much, Dr. Ward. And I'm gonna go ahead.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Well, and I feel like I've, now that we're off record here, I feel like I've learned a lot about how to do an interview and some things that I missed, asking you. So thank you for teaching me quite a bit about going. All right, and welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Miller with Campfire, and I'm so glad to have you with us here. We're sitting and talking today with Dr. Mark Ward, as I just learned, now at the university. So tell me if I get this right, Dr. Ward. Texas A&M Victoria. Is that? Am I getting that more or less correct?
Correct. It's the same building, same campus, same office, but as of September 1st, 2025, the University of Houston, Victoria was transferred from the University of Houston system instead to the Texas A&M University system, so that now my official institutional affiliation is Texas A&M University, Victoria.
Excellent. Well, very good. I'm so pleased that you're joining me to talk a little today. We're going to talk a little bit about your keynote address to RCA last year, which is now being printed in our first issue of JCR, issue 48.1, which will be hitting pretty soon, probably about the same time that this will be posted here. Why don't we dive right in? But thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, what a privilege, and I've been looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So in that keynote address, God Problem 2.0, restarting the conversation. You opened your address by revisiting, of course, Quentin Schultz's 2004 challenge about the God problem and communication studies. So that address, of course, takes us back beyond when I started in the discipline. I would imagine back before a lot of folks currently in RCA were a part of the discipline. Can you take us back a little bit to that moment and what it meant to you as a new graduate student and how it set the trajectory for the last 20 years as you've been having that conversation about the God problem?
Well, and a bit of background too, that the address was given upon presentation of my being named the 2024 Religious Communication Association Scholar of the Year. And every year, in conjunction with the National Communication Association Convention, we have our own, what used to be called a pre-conference. We call it our first day conference. And so that for the official beginning of the NCA convention, we have our own all-day RCA program that culminates with our annual awards banquet. And RCA each year gives out a number of awards: Scholar of the Year, Book of the Year, Article of the Year, Book Chapter of the Year, Dissertation of the Year, Mentor of the Year. And so it was a great honor and privilege for me to be named last year in 2024 as the RCA Scholar of the Year. Yeah. And so this article that'll be appearing in volume 48, issue 1 of the RCA Journal, the Journal of Communication and Religion, is essentially a transcription with notes the keynote address that I gave at the annual awards banquet last year. And so I start out, my first career was in religious publishing and broadcasting. And when my own two children graduated from college, I thought to myself, well, golly, what do I want to be when I grow up? Always had it in the back of my mind that I'd like to get the PhD while I was still young enough to do it. And so my wife and I made the decision in midlife that we'd go for it. And so I entered the PhD program at Clemson University. And before that, the MA in Communication Studies at Spring Arbor University. So that's sort of how I got from there to here and started on the academic life. And I come out of a more of a fundamentalist background that was more about answers than it was about questions.
Sure.
Something that I appreciated about my time at Spring Arbor University is much more of a spirit of inquiry or asking questions that I had not experienced in my previous faith community.
Yeah.
And so I had always been interested in the question of theodicy, or God's justice in the world. And actually, my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation were related to questions related to the Holocaust. Wow. And looking at essentially the final solution through the lens of organizational communication and culture. Wow. And so as I was studying these things, I ran across Dr.